British radicals became permanent cynics about their state, and generations of Iraqis grew paranoid about the skillfully hidden hands guiding their country's destiny. But still, the techniques of covert empire were effective enough to enable Britain to remain ultimate masters of Iraq well after the formal declaration of Iraqi independence in 1932. The Royal Air Force and British intelligence personnel remained discreetly in place and continued to put a positive spin on the news of Iraqi admission to the League of Nations, with long-term effects. Among the many metaphors that influenced the US administration in the last decade, British myths about the success of their experiment in Iraq, particularly the air control regime, have also informed American tactics in the region. This is partly the result, I think, of institutional collaboration between the two military and intelligence establishments during World War II and the Cold War, when the US more or less took over as masterminds of covert activity in the region. And this is also partly because of the work of military historians who, citing the Orientalist experts who created the British regime in Iraq, have confirmed its success for our generation, and have in turn been cited by, for instance, US Air Force academics in their own studies of things like the role of air power in counterinsurgency and so forth. So as early as 2003, the Pentagon began to dream of replacing troops in Iraq with air power that could, quote, strike everywhere and at once. And so today we have the enormous drone surveillance program in place over Iraq, with no plans for a sovereign Iraqi airspace, despite planned troop withdrawals. And the withdrawals themselves are to be gradual and never complete, and to involve a lot of renaming of soldiers as trainers and advisors, just as in the transition before and after 1932 under the British. Now, an airbrushed version of British military history may be influencing decision-making in the corridors of power, but the official production of public ignorance remains also a central preoccupation of our state. We still receive no official word on drone use and casualties, despite condemnation by the UN Human Rights Council. What is different from the British era is that historians are no longer the policy experts the state turns to for advice. That role is reserved for economists, political scientists, and the occasional anthropologist, the latter under the misguided notion that cultural intimacy will somehow remove the sting of an essentially colonial political relationship. This is partly, I think, because of the sway today of a universalist approach to political change that relies on a willed ignorance of history. In this kind of political sciencey approach, it's impossible to envision that the forcible removal of a dictator in a country might not result in instant liberal democracy, depending on who is doing the removing and the specific nature of that particular country's prior experience with those removers and with democracy itself. Certainly, there are exceptions. Carolyn mentioned Bernard Lewis. I wasn't going to name names, but you know, a distinguished Orientalist here and there who might confirm the administration's institutionally embedded preconceptions about the Middle East. But as a group, professional historians were perhaps too discouraging for an administration bent on war to consult. And here I'm going to repeat, or echo at least, a lot of what Carolyn started out saying at the beginning of our discussion. More worrying, from my point of view, is that historians also seem to have relinquished the role of public critic that have also traced to British Iraq. Again, there are exceptions. For instance, a financial historian, who will remain nameless, who stepped well beyond his area of expertise to recite for the public the airbrushed version of the British experience on numerous occasions. And certainly among professional historians, we've had a wide and rich conversation about the war, for instance, in the organization Historians Against the War. But few of us, except perhaps one here, have reached a mass audience, and I think we could do much more. But we are at times our own worst enemy. When a historian ventures to participate in public debate, he or she often not only invites close scrutiny of his or her politics, but also serious questioning of his or her commitment to real academic history. And I think this is only partly because of jealousy. It's more to do, I think, with our understanding of what the historian's job is. It is time, I think, for today's historians to reclaim both the role of policy expert and the role of truth teller to the state. Of course, the Pentagon may remain impervious to historians' claim to expertise of such a practical nature, particularly if the stories we tell clash with its predigested, institutionally embedded myths about the Middle East. But for the sake of sound policy and the sound functioning of American democracy, the historian's real audience is not policymakers, but the public itself, as it discusses problems and tries to influence political action. Given how important historical interpretation and misinterpretation have been to decision-making in the war on terror, it simply makes sense for professional historians to participate more actively in public debate about it, whether through blogs, op-eds, trade publications, teach-ins, media interviews, public lectures, or what have you. Practically speaking, this means writing for a wider public, more accessibly with a more obvious and positive political edge, and actively engaging in public debate. It means finding an audience for and a mode of conveying critical history as much as the monumental and antiquarian history that are the staples of trade publishing in our field. It also means reasserting the relevance of history and historical expertise against the monopolistic claims of social scientists in both the university and the public sphere. I'm not calling for an abrupt abandonment of our necessarily highly specialized academic research programs, but for making an effort, at least, to communicate the politically urgent aspects of it to a wider audience, understood as an obligation for all of us who are employed by institutions that receive huge doses of money from the public and from publicly minded donors. We do a good job of inculcating the importance of professional service in our graduate students. Why not public service? If you know something relevant, you should feel obligated to share it. That obligation, that sense of a public trust, must be part of our own subjectivity as historians. So in short, what I'm saying is enough moaning about politics in the halls. An anti-establishment posture is not enough. Thank you very much.